personal friend. He's an author. In 2016, he released a book called Tarnishing the Badge, What's Going On with Law Enforcement. And it's basically an insider's perspective. It's very good. I encourage all those that are watching to order it. It's on Amazon. Let me see. He had a very successful career before becoming a law enforcement officer and was a chief in McCall, Idaho. He founded a company called Conflict Resolutions about 20 years ago. I first met him during, it's a federal civil rights case where we were called to be like consultants and expert witnesses. Jerry, it's been my experience as a consummate professional. While we were working on the case, on that civil rights case, I actually got appointed to be COO for a grassroots kind of a nonpartisan, a nonprofit, and that fights for the rights of Americans. And of course, Jerry was right there. And I trained with him from the guru of coordination, who has since passed. And we did some traveling together in the region and actually went to New Mexico. It was really nice. When I decided to open up my international company, my fingerprint company, of course, I reached out to Jerry to help me lead the project. And Jerry was very interested. And then he told me no. But he had the greatest excuse. Now you got to hear this. Jerry said that he wanted to focus on his family and getting his PhD, which are awesome things to say no to. So, but I was honored that he entertained the idea. Again, the next speaker I hold in high esteem. He and his wife are very blessed. He recently finished his PhD and is currently the acting director of the Chamber of Commerce in Caldwell. And he is a good fireman. That's why he's there, because he knows how to put out fires. It's a great honor that I introduced Dr. Jerry Summers.
Well, it's an honor to be here. First of all, I'm the executive director of the Caldwell Chamber of Commerce. And so let's get into this. It's going to be a quick presentation because I'm hoping to spend a lot more time on question and answers. So let's talk about the agenda. I want to do a brief introduction on law enforcement, and I want to do some educational background on myself, and then I want to focus on what I call a cop's worldview and things not to do and things to do, and then we're going to end it with questions. So that's just a quick outline of what we're doing here today. So who am I and why should anybody care? That's what everybody needs to know. You know, I'm just a guy sitting here talking to you. Why should you even care about it? So let me start with a little thing. From 1992, I moved to McCall in 1991, in Idaho in 91. From 1992 to 1994, I was the detention supervisor for Valley County. I had to move pictures. It was in my right for the Valley County Detention Center. And then in 97 to 98, I went to work for, I did several things between 94 and 97. In 97, I went to work for the McCall Police Department as their code enforcement officer, which is basically a meter maid and dog catcher. And from there, in 1999, there was a COPS grant in 98 to 99 that the McCall Police Department qualified for. So they hired me to fill that COPS grant. And then we got a new city manager that came in and said, let's get rid of that COPS grant, you know, or we only have 1 year, we can fire him in a year. So the chief came to me and said, okay, if we fill you into this position and it goes away in a year, would you still be interested in doing that? And I said, absolutely. And she said, why? And I said, because it would get me certified. And then at that point I could lateral to another agency. And she said, well, I don't want you to lateral to another agency. How about if I change your title to community service officer, send you to the academy, get you certified, and when a position opens up, we'll go ahead and move you into that. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. So I went to the academy as a community service officer. And as soon as I graduated, one of the officers quit and I moved into a patrol position in 99. And then in 2000, there was an opening for the school SRO. Our school SRO resigned, moved back to California. She was from California. And we had 9 months left to fill that position and nobody wanted to take it. As a low person on the totem pole, it came to me and I said, well, why are you talking to me? I'm the low man on the totem pole. And my lieutenant said, because nobody else wants it. And if you want it, we'll give you a chance. And I said, I'll take it as long as you understand that I'm only going to do it for 9 months. That's not something I want to do in my law enforcement career. And they said, that's fine. So we filled that grant and left. And then in 2000, I moved from the SRO. I applied for a grant, got a grant to take me to what's called, it's Rainierson and Chisholm's crime scene reconstruction class. It was a 60-hour class. It was $2,500 and they awarded the grant to me and I had to sign a contract that I would remain in law enforcement for 3 years after I graduated. If not, then I would have to pay it back in full. Now, if I got fired for misconduct or something like that, I wouldn't have to repay it. But if I voluntarily severed from law enforcement, I'd have to buy it back. I agreed to do that. And so we went through that course. And then in 2000, they moved me into detectives. And I was in charge of crime scene reconstruction. And I was in charge in white collar crime, complex white collar crimes. And then any major event. I spent a lot of time on child abuse and property crimes as well. And I was promoted to detective sergeant in 2003. And from 2003, I was a detective sergeant. And then our patrol sergeant blew his knee out, needed a knee replacement. So they moved me into patrol sergeant from 2004 to 2005. And he went into investigations. Then in 2005, we had a major turnover at the McCall Police Department. The chief, the lieutenant, and the other sergeant were terminated for misconduct. They were allowed to resign. And I found myself as the only surviving member of management of the McCall Police Department. They asked me if I would fill in as an interim chief of police, which I did from 2005 to 2006. After a national survey and search, there were 63 applicants for that position, and I wound up coming out number one above. At that time, the final two were myself and I just lost his name. He did the Idaho State Police Detective Division for many years, and I actually prevailed against him and wound up becoming the chief of police full time from 2006 to 2015. So that's a brief background on myself. The other thing that people need to know is that during those years, I actually qualified as an expert witness in crime scene reconstruction, complex financial crimes, internal affairs, not so much an expert. I did internal affairs investigations, was an expert in question document examination and blood spatter analysis. So in a short thing, that's who I am. Whether you care or not, it may not matter either. But so my educational background in 2004, I moved to McCall. I was one of those weird guys that got a job as a vice president in Citibank without a bachelor's degree. And then I recognized that fairly quickly after I got there, I wasn't going any further unless I got a master's. I left Citibank because it just wasn't it for me. So in 2004, I went and got my bachelor's degree in pastoral ministries out of Trinity College of the Bible, which is also associated with the University of Liverpool in the UK. In 2012, I completed my MBA in marketing from the University of Liverpool. In 2016, I published 3 fiction books it's called The Unmissable Series, and it's about a female serial killer who is a domestic violence counselor and kills the perpetrators and makes it look like a suicide or an accident. It's forensically correct with one major flaw that if you do crime scene investigations, you'll probably pick up on it. When I wrote the first murder scene, I recognized that I probably wrote a fairly good roadmap to how to commit a murder. And I had to go back and take some things out, so I had some flaws in there. So that's where that is. There's 3 of that. There's a 4th book in there that I haven't published. It's completed, but it's done. And then in 2016, I wrote a book called Tarnishing of the Badge. And the tagline is why law enforcement is losing public trust. Like I said, my dissertation for my MBA was law enforcement decertification, shifting paradigms of ethics, morality, and politics from law enforcement's traditional approach to what's called a resource-based view. And a resource-based view is simply putting the right people in the right place with the right talent and letting them prosper for the benefit of the organization. And I completed my PhD in April 3rd of this year. I successfully defended it, earned it, and it was awarded to me. And that dissertation was determining individual motivations for criminal behavior. So let's talk about the cops' worldview. It's us against them from a cop's perspective. If you're not a cop, you're not going to understand what they do. That's just the reality of who they are and what they do. If you're a former cop, you might understand, but you're irrelevant now. You're old school. We'll give you a little more courtesy than we give you as a cop. We give you a former cop will give you a little more courtesy than we'll give anybody else. But really, you're irrelevant now. No one has your back except another cop. So as private investigators, you're automatically going to be suspect in an officer's view. If you don't have a fellow cop's back, in other words, if you won't cover for them, you're not to be trusted. It's as simple as that. That's just a culture that we've got, and it's one that I fight against quite a bit. And if we're in corrections, you're a corrections officer, you're not a cop. And I like to put it this way, that I would never go in and say I knew anything about corrections, because it's a whole different world than what you do on the street. If you took me as an officer that's been trained and put me in a prison or a jail cell, those inmates would manipulate me, and they would get away with stuff they're not supposed to, simply because I don't know the rules or the policies and that kind of thing. And that's the view of a on the street cop with a corrections officer. Now, there are some minor exceptions. If you're a probation parole officer, you're sworn and you work alongside them in the street. You're still not a cop, you're still a corrections officer, but that's the way you're viewed. And if you testify for the defense, or again, and especially if you testify against another cop, you have gone to the dark side. And so those are the things that you're up against when you're wanting to deal with law enforcement as far as their worldview. Let's talk a little bit about what to do and what not to do. And I'm sorry, I advanced it trying to move the thing. The first thing you need to do as a private investigator, from my viewpoint, is to build a rapport with officers. That means get to know the officers in your city, interact with them, invite them to lunch, even if you can. Just get to know them so they know who you are as a private investigator. They're going to be hesitant the first couple of times, but once they get to know that you're there to just do a job and you're not going to interfere with them and create a problem for them, then you'll start to build trust and rapport, and you'll get some cooperation out of them. Let them know that when you're in their city and what you're doing. In other words, if you're going to be sitting on a residential sidewalk or street in your car taking pictures, let the on-duty officers know you're going to be there. You are a private investigator and you're investigating something. You may not be able to tell them what it is, but that will resolve the problem. If they know you're there, it'll solve the problem of an officer coming up and blowing your cover sitting there by asking you what you're doing and why you're taking pictures. So if you let them know, that's helpful. And also let them know when you finish whatever you're doing in their city or in that area. Tell them, look, I'm done. I've got it done. Thank you for understanding that. They'll appreciate it. That's just professional. If you discover information that you can ethically inform them and it will help them, go ahead and do so. Now that's a fine line for you on ethics, and that's why I said if it can be done ethically and it will help them, don't be afraid to say, hey, this is what I found out. I don't know if it'll help you, but here you go. They'll appreciate it. They won't tell you that immediately, but it'll give you a lot of credibility with them. If you discovered that they did something wrong and you're going to testify about it in court, be humble about it. And if you can, try not to try to provide a way out for them being wrong. I found this information that they weren't aware of. This came up later. They may not have been able to get this based on, because I could get people to talk to me as a private investigator that the officers couldn't get to talk to them. You know, it's probably that your skills are better than them as a communication skills, but don't be afraid to say, you know, I was just able to because there wasn't a distrust of me as there was of maybe somebody in uniform, and that will help them as well. It's playing to their ego to some extent, and it's also just being professional. Know your rights and the law. Don't argue the law with them unless you're absolutely certain you're right. And then the best thing to do is get their supervisor out, quote the law, and then if they insist on kicking you out of somewhere, go ahead and do that and then file a complaint with them. But don't argue with them on the street. Just state your position and see where we go, and then follow your code of conduct and rules of ethics. And sometimes it's best just to let them know. If any of you have not read the law enforcement code of ethics, you can find it. You just Google law enforcement code of ethics. You'll find that several of your ethics coincide with theirs. And if you can remind them of some stuff every now and then, your code of ethics, why you can't do it, and you know it follows their code of ethics, I'll understand that. It just helps in building credibility to you. Well, things to do. Build a rapport with the officers. Again, we've talked about that earlier. Oh, I just covered that again, didn't I?
That's okay. We won't hold it against you.
I'm sorry, I got myself thrown off. Build a rapport with them. Hang on, I'm looking where I was. Okay. Okay. We jumped ahead too. So things not to do. We'll just reverse it. Don't act like or say you understand what a cop deals with. They're not going to believe you. You're not part of their fraternity, if you will. They're just not going to believe you. Don't try to prove you're just like their detectives. Again, you're not a cop and you don't have the training, you don't understand. Don't tell them you have more education or training, even though you might. That just irritates them. And this really comes out in a couple areas. People that do a lot of civil investigations, especially when it comes to divorce, you understand finances probably better than they do. You understand dynamics with kids probably than they do, and you're better at communicating those things. Just be humble about it and just let that go, because if you're going to sit there and puff up and tell them, well, I'm more educated, all cops are stupid, that kind of thing, you're not going to get anywhere. And eventually you're going to want them to help you in one way or another. Don't present as arrogant or as their best friend. That will come as you build rapport with them. And never tell them that they're wrong about an investigation unless you're in court and you can prove it. And if you're in court and you can prove it, then it goes back to trying to be humble and provide a way out for them if at all possible. We talked about this again. I'll just jump ahead. I don't know what I'm doing here, guys.
I'm stuck in the loop.
I'm doing something. It's stuck in there. So
you might want to go out and just click on the individual.
Well, let's see if I can get to the next thing. Okay. This is one of my favorite sayings, just so you know it. The way to get started is to quit talking about it and start doing it. And that was from Walt Disney. Finally, thank you all for allowing me the privilege to present to you today. And then I'm open for questions at this point.
One thing that's very important in going through your list is how to build these relationships with the law enforcement officers. And of course, I'm sure if you've come across some of these ways, there's the FOP, which I've been a member of. There's, support your law enforcement. There's the annual policeman's ball, and it's very inexpensive to go, and you get to mix and mingle with the who's who. I usually get a table, but you don't necessarily get a table. But just mix and mingle with them, let them know who you are. They get to learn about you. They get to learn about your family, your spouse. And this all helps because they want to deal with, they want, you, how do I put this? They work for you. So it's good for you and it's good for them. And you'll find that they'll be open to discuss because they know you support what they do.
Don't forget there's law enforcement appreciation weeks, back the blue, those kinds of things. The more things you're seen at, even if you don't, other than introducing yourself as a private investigator and not going any further than that, the more you've seen there, the better off you are in building that rapport. If they get used to you, they know you, then let's say you're in Boise and you're fairly well known by the police officers and you're going to go into Meridian and you walk in and say, I'm in Meridian, I'm doing an investigation in this area. And I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but I am doing an investigation. I'll be there taking photos or staking out something or whatever it may be. I guarantee you a Meridian officer is going to call somebody in Boise and say, what do you know about so-and-so? And are they straight up or are they somebody we need to be concerned about? And so that helps not only build rapport in the city you're in, but if you go to another city or an outlying area, you'll get that support automatically. Because if another cop says, hey, you're good to go, you're pretty much good to go with them.
Another thing, and Jerry, I didn't know this about you. I just found out. I was also, but I asked to be in the position in community relations, police community relations, and I was a public information officer. And one thing that's good, you have neighborhood watch, okay, and business watch. These are important to get into because you will meet the officer assigned to that area. They will get to know you and they will become a great ally for you. It doesn't matter what area you're interested. If you're athletic, they do a law enforcement torch run to help Special Olympics every year. And if you sign up to run a quarter of a mile, they appreciate that. Again, you'll get the shirt that says Special Olympics Law Enforcement Torch Run, and you're seen around that. People automatically relate, and they think that you at least support law enforcement. Well, and you got to see. Go ahead, sir.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry, and volunteer at the agencies that have a police athletic league, or sponsor something. If you don't have the time to give them time, sponsor it. Make a donation. And even a small donation, $50 or $100, they appreciate it.
Yeah, you can even make a banner that says your investigation or whatever, be in good standing with the PIAI, and put the logo there. And all you have to do is buy a case of water and put it on ice. You get to fly your flag there at the baseball field, and you got free water. That's a good conversation starter. And with people getting to know you, it will help you also get some leads or get some jobs. So that's very important. So there's ways out there. Do any of you have any other ways that you thought of or that work for you?
Yeah, Matt. So one thing that I've done before, and I don't have it on my current surveillance rigs, but I do donate to the, like the local PD and also the troopers and such. And I used to put the little decal on the back of my window. So if they do get called on you, they're going to be a little bit friendly or whatever. But also if they pass you, they look, they're more than likely going to move on. Once they get used to seeing your vehicle around. That's one thing that I've found in the past. I don't have it on my current vehicles, but that's something that could be done as well.
Absolutely.
Another thing, let me see, what else did we talk about, Jerry?
I see somebody ask if they can get a copy of the PowerPoint. I'm more than happy to provide it to you guys.
What has been your prior experience in dealing with investigators while you were in law enforcement?
I've had both. I've had investigators that just, the ones that I found do the building the rapport the best are the vehicle repo agents. Believe it or not, they'll come into the police department. They'll say, look, we're in the area. This is the car we've got a repo order on. They'll supply an order of the repo to us, and then say, when we find it, we're going to take it. We're going to get out of the area. If you get a call that it's stolen, we would appreciate you, alerting dispatch or telling them ahead of time that it wasn't stolen, it was repossessed, and they can get a hold of us at this number. That is what I'm talking about when you build a rapport with a police department. If you walk in and say, look, I'm a private investigator, I'm investigating I don't know, I'm going to pull from the air. I'm investigating a cheating spouse, and I'll be in this area taking photos. That's all you have to say. And this is a vehicle I'm in. Please, please know that I'm there. Let your people know that I'm there. And if you come by, as soon as I leave, I'll let you know that I'm done. That is huge, because then patrol, when they go by, or if somebody calls and says, hey, there's a car in the neighborhood, they're taking pictures, and I'm worried about them being a pedophile or something like that, the law enforcement agency can go, we know who they are. They're an investigator. Or they can say, we know who they are. They're not doing anything wrong. They've already talked to us, and don't worry about it. That'll save neighbors from coming out and knocking on your door when you're sitting in a car going, what in the hell are you doing here? It's easier for women to sit in a car and take pictures than it is for men, because automatically, if you're a man taking photos, you're a child molester. So be aware of that. Just understand it.
Right. And give them your license plate number, and give them a callback number. And that's very important, because if they start getting a lot of calls, like one neighborhood I was in, they had a very well organized neighborhood watch, and I was there for about 20 minutes, and they had my vehicle posted on their webpage. That's how quick. So those are things that you have to be aware of, and then have a good ruse also. So that way, when they ask you, you can say, this is what I'm looking for. And when I've done that, usually everybody in the neighborhood wants you to help find that missing vehicle that you're looking for.
The other thing that's huge is I've had a lot of people, private investigators, say, you ask them what they're doing, and they say, well, I'm photographing because I've got a complaint from the workers' comp board, and I want to catch somebody doing something they're not supposed to. We got that a lot when I was in McCall, because what would happen is people would leave other states or come out of Boise and come up to McCall and say, I've got a bad back and I'm 80%, 100% disabled. And then you'd have an investigator go up and take pictures of them chopping wood and, hauling stuff that by the doctor's orders they couldn't do. And then they'd go back. And so we got that a lot. And I can't tell you, I've never, as a cop, I never asked somebody to show me the order that they're doing the investigation on. If they told me that's what they were doing, it was good enough for me. So, yes.
Does anybody have any other questions? Now's your time to ask. What I like about Jerry is in law enforcement, you're for the people. As a laws, they got to be laws for people. And he doesn't necessarily always back the blue. He backs what's right. So if there's a question you have, he can tell you exactly like it is. I appreciate his honesty in telling you what the police officer sees when you go up and say, I'm an investigator. They already know. They have that mentality. And if you don't understand that mentality, then you're behind. You're not getting anywhere with that police officer.
Let me jump in. Has anybody on the call gone through a Daubert hearing? That's a hearing to become an expert witness or to be questioned. Daubert hearings are usually occur in U.S. federal court. I I didn't say this earlier. I'm considered an expert witness in the U.S. Judicial Court in the 5th Judicial District, which is Washington, D.C. and Virginia. That's one of the hardest places to become an expert witness. And I went through a 6-hour Daubert hearing with the Chief Justice, Judge Urbanski, and it was brutal. And so understanding that as a private investigator, when you go in, whatever side you're working for is going to attempt to lay a foundation of your credibility. And the opposite side is going to do everything they can to shoot that credibility down. That's basically a Daubert hearing. That's what you go through. I'm also an expert witness here in Idaho in the 4th Judicial District with regard to crime scene blood spatter, question document, policies and procedures in policing. I don't say that to be braggadocious, but what it is understanding that when you go in as a private investigator, the courts are going to check and see how you testify, and they're going to ask the jury to give credibility to either your honesty or your expertise. So the first thing in a Daubert hearing to do is remain calm. The opposing side is going to do everything they can to get you riled up and say something you shouldn't. So calm, humble, those kinds of things are your best approaches. And once you've gone through that, you not only establish credibility in the court, but you also establish credibility with the officers that are sitting there that you may be testifying against or in support of, one way or another. And let's look at it this way. You've got a divorce case. It's a highly contested child case, and the officers came in on a domestic violence call that they either couldn't prove or didn't feel there was sufficient enough to arrest. And you find out that there was significant reason. The child tells you something that they didn't tell the officer. That the way you handle that and the way you deliver that in the courtroom will either give you credibility in that law enforcement officer's eyes, or it will destroy your credibility. So just if you can remain humble and kind about the way you oppose an officer, that gives you credibility. I mean, I've testified in Virginia, I testified against a police shooting where I couldn't say the police shot him, but I could tell you that he didn't shoot himself. And we went through the Daubert hearing, and even at one point, not only did I go through a 6-hour Daubert hearing, which is extremely long, they're usually 2 hours maximum, 1.5 to 2 hours. But I went through a 6-hour Daubert hearing where I was on the stand for 6 solid hours answering questions. Then I came back 2 weeks later, and they had ruled me as an expert witness in crime scene reconstruction. And I came back, and I was on the plaintiff side at this point in a civil case, and the opposing counsel, when I got called up, immediately opposed my expertise, and actually asked me to leave the room. And the judge and that attorney and the attorney that I was working for got into a shouting match. I mean, I was sitting out in the hall and I could hear them. And one of the things I heard the judge say was, "He's a chief from Idaho. What in the F does he know?" And I came back in. He ruled that I was an expert witness, and he said, "Mr. Summers, I suspect you might have heard raised voices, and did you hear anything that we need to address?" And I said, "Your Honor, actually, I did. I heard you question what I know as a chief from Idaho, and my answer to you, sir, is that I apparently know more than the officers that investigated this and the Virginia State Police investigation, because their investigation was so egregious that nobody could defend that." And he just kind of chuckled and said, "Okay," and moved on. He said, I apologize. I was a little heated. I probably shouldn't have said that myself. That's when you can take a little harder stance, because the jury wasn't there. It was just the judge and the two attorneys, and any witness that was in the courtroom during that. You can be a little bolder then, but when you're on the stand and you're being questioned, the best thing you can do is just remain calm and polite, even if they're rude to you.
And that's, for those of you who don't know, that's what they call Rule 702. And that's the qualifications for an expert in a federal court. Daubert hearing basically is to show your knowledge, your skill, your experience, your education to form an opinion. And this has to come from scientific and technical and other specialized knowledge that you'll have to make sure that you understand the evidence and to determine the fact of the evidence to testify. It's only based on sufficient facts or data. And you have to use the testimony. It's a product of reliable principles and methods. And they got to be, of course, be pertinent to the case. And they'll tell you exactly what you can say. There'll be motions in limine, or there will be instructions by the judge outside the presence of the jury to say you cannot say the police shot him.
One of the other things you need to know if you're doing that, and this came up in this Daubert hearing, and I hadn't anticipated it. I happened to read and get that, but the defense counsel asked me, what is the error rate of gunshot residue testing? How many false positives do you get or false negatives do you get? And I happen to have read it, and it's 60%. And so the argument of the state police and the agency that was involved in, we didn't do gunshot residue because it has a high failure rate. And most of these officers touched this gun that he shot himself with, so they would have residue on their hands. Well, they didn't do gunshot residue on clothing or anything else. And they were trying to excuse it by saying, since it has such a high failure rate, then, there's no need in doing it. It has no credibility. And my argument to that was, well, that's maybe true, but if there is no gunshot residue on the officers at all, that tells a better story than if there is. If there is, it doesn't mean they're guilty of shooting somebody. They may have been in the area where a gunshot went off. It could be a whole bunch of transfers that you get. But if they didn't have it, it excluded them from being involved in that shooting. And you didn't do that. So that hurt the officers that were involved or on the scene. And that was my position. The other thing that came up is with regard to blood spatter. They wanted to know what the failure rate was on investigation of blood spatter. And that became a little more complicated because there are so many different definitions. In other words, from an academic standpoint, if you talk about blowback, that's an error because the correct term is backspatter. And that is when you shoot yourself, the gases go in and then the blood goes out as the projectile leaves the body, and it also projects back towards the hand or the gun. Officers will call that backspatter or blowback, and that's not correct. It's backspatter. And so from an academic style, if you're doing a survey and somebody uses the wrong terminology, it's a wrong answer. And so I said, what you're looking at is your rate goes from 8% to 33% if you look at terminology and only terminology. I mean, if somebody tells me it's blowback, I know what they're talking about. We're really talking about the same thing. They're just using the incorrect term. Therefore, that would be an incorrect response, and it would raise your scientific credibility. It will hurt your scientific credibility the higher that number is. So it's good to know that when you're going in, if you're going to testify, even if you make some statement with regard to child abuse or whatever, cheating or that kind of thing, it's nice to know if you have some sort of statistical background where how many times have you taken a picture and you see somebody in it looks like an intimate embrace, but they happen to be a friend or a daughter or a sister, a relative, and it had nothing to do with a cheating situation. You'll get those kinds of questions in court.
And for those of you wondering, what the HEEL does this have to do with this presentation? And it has everything to do with it, because one thing that he mentioned there at the last is very important. That's your code of conduct and knowing the rules of evidence. When you're in court, the judge sees you, other officers, important people that attend will see this. Your testimony is crucial. If you're the expert, you'll be qualified as one, and you'll be able to give that opinion. But what people think about you represents not only you, but all the other investigators around you. There's a base, a military base, I know you in Okinawa, how do you pronounce it? Is that military people? Know what I'm talking about?
Okinawa, yeah.
Right? Okay, and they have a military base there. And there was a soldier that raped one of the local girls. And that one soldier, there was a big uprising because all they knew was US soldiers are rapists. So the actions of one spread through lots and lots of people, and they still often deal with that issue. If you're there and you testify, you lie, that affects all of us. So in your relationship with them, be honest. You got to live your life, just tell it like it is. There's no candy cone. If you're an expert, they'll certify you one. If you're not, then you don't meet the expectations of an expert on that day. That's something. Your reputation is everything. Without a code of conduct, we are nothing. And without knowing the rules. So
if I can tag on to that to give you an example, private investigators get lumped into the same thing that a cop gets involved in. In other words, there was an officer in Boise that was a Boise police officer. He had not been an officer for over 20 years, and he was arrested by Boise Police Department for dealing methamphetamine. And what is the front page ad or the front page headline on the Idaho Statesman? Boise police officer arrested for dealing meth. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not fair. It gives that whole Boise Police Department a bad reputation, where anybody at that department at that time probably didn't even know the guy, unless you were in a fairly high management position. You didn't know who he was. He'd been gone for 20 years. Well, if a private investigator gets caught doing something like that, you're going to get the same type of headline. Private investigator, Idaho private investigator does this, and it taints all of you. It's not fair, but that's the way life is.
Mm-hmm. I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, a little off topic, but have you ever heard of a successful appeal based on law enforcement not having conducted a gun residue or blood splatter alone? Yeah. Just those two alone?
Yes. Because what happens is there are certain things forensically that happen if you shoot yourself. And there are other things that happen if you do not shoot yourself. So in this instance, the individual was said to have put a gun up here and shot himself, and the bullet came out here. And there was a fence within 18 inches of where he was supposedly laying. Well, when you get a perforating wound, meaning the projectile comes out, it takes with it organic material, blood, tissue, and brain matter most of the time. And so it's going to be projected out at a 45-degree angle up to 4 feet. That's the far, but between 2 and 4 feet, unless it's carried by a bone fragment or something like that. It could go further at that point. But generally, most of your spatter occurs in that 2 to 4 feet. There was nothing on that fence. There were no blood spatter at all. And there was no back spatter on the guy's hand. And that's something that happens with every shooting. If you shoot yourself, you're going to find that. And not finding that either means you didn't do your investigation correctly or it didn't happen. And so, yes, I've seen that. after I retired and moved down into the Treasure Valley, I ran a company called Let's Make It Matter. And I've subsequently closed it. It was a company in which myself and some attorneys and other chiefs of police decided we were going to go and help people that we believe their cases involved prosecutorial or police misconduct. And we did so, and I did it pro bono. And then after about $40,000 out of my own pocket, I said, you know, and people hiring private investigators after I did an enormous amount of background work for them. I just said, I'm not doing this anymore. But yes, there were a couple cases in which I used to say when I was in law enforcement that 97 to 100% of the people that are in prison are guilty. And I've got to say now my attitude has changed. And I would guess there's as much as 35% that are currently incarcerated that have been wrongfully convicted either by malicious actions of the prosecutor or the police departments. Now that, and by what I say malicious, it's intentional. In other words, if you were convicted of rape in 1980 or let's say 1960, there was no DNA. And then if they find now that with forensic science advancing, they find out that there was DNA collected, but it's not your DNA, that's not a malicious thing. I don't think the officers set the person up. They just didn't have the technology that we have today. But the cases I got involved with were one, and there was one in Ohio that where the prosecutor denied that they paid a witness, and there was no way they could find it. We looked into it, and I happened to do a public information request of the prosecutor's budget because she came from a different county of the state and I found out that she paid this individual a decent amount of money out of her budget in the other county. So if nobody had ever looked at it, they would have never found that occurred. So there are officers that will, the problem is a lot of times officers will, and as an investigator, you need to be aware of it. You may have a theory of what happened. And there's a tendency that you make the evidence fit into your theory. And that's the wrong way. You take your theory and have the evidence tell you which way. And if your theory is incorrect or the evidence doesn't meet that, abandon that theory and find another one because you'll eventually get to the right one. Did that answer your question?
It did.
Okay. Yes, there are cases in which just shoddy investigations have proven a person innocent.
Or at least got them as far as the appeal process.
And let's talk about the appeal process. The problem with an appeal, a post-conviction appeal, and a lot of people get this wrong, is that they're still trying to prove the person's innocence. A post-conviction appeal requires you to get new evidence that wasn't available at the time, or find that there was misbehavior by either the officers or the prosecutor. And too many people get involved in, okay, we're going to prove this guy's innocent or this gal's innocent. That question is a question of fact. It's already been determined by the jury. What you then have to do is find evidence that will, that's sufficient enough to that if it had been known at the time of trial, it may have changed the jury's opinion. And that's a high burden to go through. But if you don't do that and you continue to try the innocence of the person, then a lot of times they lose additional rights in appeals because people are appealing, trying to prove, and I've seen it over and over again. You're appealing, trying to prove the person's innocent, and the judge says, basically, that's been decided by the court. We're not even going to look at that. And so now that one post-conviction appeal isn't possible now. And now you're limiting, as you're going, you're limiting the person's ability to get good, solid post-conviction appeals.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information out there, and we're lucky to have Jerry with us today. I appreciate him coming by and visiting with us. Hopefully it's the last time we see him. Does anybody have any other questions for Jerry?
I'm going to leave you my phone number. My phone number is area code 208-315-4788. That is my private cell phone number. Please feel free to call it if you have a question. Understand that if I don't recognize the number, I'm not going to answer it. So leave me a voicemail and then I'll get back to you. I promise.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jerry. Do appreciate it. I don't think we have any other questions.
No, it was great. I loved it.
Yeah, and you can find Jerry's books on Amazon. I think he's a great writer and he's a good guy. So he's definitely one to have in your corner. Thanks again, Jerry. Congratulations on your PhD. Continued success. And I know we'll be seeing you soon.
All righty. Thank you all for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.